Like Craig said, I'm the director of the SR 520 program, so I'm the one that manages the project that gets to build the infrastructure over the long run. Again, the 520 program is really made up of several independent projects, as Craig talked about, and we're just showing the corridor here. And if you start in I-5, you can see the corridor stretches all the way out to Redmond. What we're trying to show in color are the different independent projects, and Craig talked a lot about the orange stripe we have. That's called the Lake Washington Congestion Management Project. What he talked about with the smarter highways, when we start construction in the corridor, we are going to use the smarter highways features that are going to be operating this fall to help us manage construction traffic. So I think that's one of the exciting things that we're looking forward to use. On the blue here, we show the East Side Transit and HOV project. That's an independent project that stretches from Medina out to 202. We have two separate projects that address the floating bridge. The first one is the pontoon construction project. You heard a little bit already about how the viaduct is vulnerable to earthquakes. The floating bridge for Lake Washington is vulnerable to wind and wave action. We experience that every year. We've had some events already that we're monitoring on the lake. We've done, over the last 10 years, we've done what we can to retrofit the floating bridge and address some of its vulnerabilities, but it really is reaching the end of its life. So as part of that, we created the pontoon construction project so that the Department of Transportation will be ready in case there's an event that would damage the floating bridge, and we could be in position to replace the floating structure as quickly as possible. If I were to be standing here today and an event took out the floating bridge for some reason, it could take 4 years when we look at it to replace that. So that project is really our catastrophic failure planning. If you look at the stripe that we show in green, that's the project that adds capacity from I-5 in Seattle out to Medina. So that project looks at expanding the capacity of the 520 corridor in that segment. So I'm going to talk about that segment now. We've been working on the 520 corridor for more than a decade to come to conclusion about what we were going to build, and this April the governor and the legislature came together and announced the preferred alternative in the Seattle area, and continued to endorse a 6-lane corridor. So it was a major milestone for us. The legislature and the governor also asked us to work with our partners at the transit agencies, the University of Washington, and the City of Seattle on some work groups that are listed here as the 6392 work groups, and I'll talk a little bit about that as that work's ongoing. Next spring, we're going to publish our final environmental impact statement, and then we conclude the NEPA process, our environmental process, with a record of decision in June of next year, so it's a pretty exciting time for us. We're also looking at contracting with design builders to complete the construction of the floating bridge and awarding the contract for that next spring. All with our goal of replacing the floating bridge and having HOV lanes on the corridor from the edge of the west side of Lake Washington to Redmond by 2014. So the preferred alternative really was what we called a 4+2 configuration. So that's 2 general purpose lanes in each direction and an HOV lane in each direction. We looked at an urban interchange design in the city of Seattle. We've been working very hard to be sure that we have transit connectivity where we need it, where we can improve on minimizing our effects in the parks and the natural environment on the Seattle side. We looked at adding a second Basco bridge, and that's endorsed in the preferred alternative, and we have some more conversations on that. The second Basco bridge over the Montlake Cut, right up here to the University of Washington. And the reason it's so important for us to consider that connection up to the University of Washington is because Sound Transit is constructing the U-Link station by Husky Stadium there, and it's important for us to figure out how we connect rubber-tired transit with Sound Transit's link station. So that's part of our conversations. We're also looking at adding a bicycle pedestrian path across the corridor like we already have on I-90. And we're looking to treat stormwater and reduce our noise through the city here. So those are all endorsed in our preferred alternative. Some of the questions I got, particular for this group, was what sort of right-of-way acquisitions are you pursuing? So right now we're working with the Museum of History and Industry to acquire their buildings and improvements. The museum is located right here today, which, as you can see, has a white or a blue dot on it, and that's our stormwater treatment pond. So we're working to acquire the Museum of History and Industry. We also affect a private parcel along Portage Bay. They happen to have their property for sale, and so we were able to work with them to acquire their property. So those are some of the acquisitions we're doing now. We're also looking at mitigation parcels, and so while we're not purchasing right now, we're working to identify the right parcel and acquire it. The other thing we worked on in a preferred alternative, looking into the future, is how would our corridor accommodate light rail? And so we're looking at how the floating bridge could accommodate the weight of light rail, and our design accommodates that. We're also looking at how it would connect into the city of Seattle, and we have a couple options, whether it continues to go to Montlake Boulevard or whether it connects up to the University Link station. We've looked at a couple of ways to accommodate that, and we've designed our mainline highway improvements to allow that to occur if it does in the future. So the bill 6392 asked us to put together some work groups, in particular to look at design refinements and transit connections. We worked with the City of Seattle, in particular the focus with the Transportation SDOT, the Department of Transportation, and you've heard a little bit already, but I can only say good things about the Department of Transportation, the City of Seattle. They worked very hard to support not only their executive branch, but the recommendations from their council. And I think they did just a stellar job working with us in a very difficult situation for them. They helped us look at traffic within the City of Seattle, traffic within the Washington Park Arboretum. It's a very complicated issue when you look at balancing the trips that want to go through the park versus the trips that would go through the neighborhoods. And they were vital in advancing those conversations. So on October 1st, WashDOT and the City of Seattle submitted our recommendations to the legislature and the governor on the design refinements and transit connections efforts that we did. And we looked at traffic management in the Arboretum and traffic management. We looked at better bicycle and pedestrian connections within the city. We had recommendations from the transit agencies that we incorporated on bus stops and transit priority. We had a lot of conversations on phasing that second Basque Bridge over the Montlake Cut. There's a lot of desire for us to minimize our footprint, and really the focus is that building that bridge would require that we acquire 2 homes. And those 2 homes are in a historic neighborhood. So what is the function of that second Basque Bridge, and what would be the triggers before we construct it? And so we looked at 3 triggers. The trigger would be safety. So if the queues on Montlake Boulevard back up onto 520, causing a safety problem, that would be one trigger that would say we'd build the second Basque Bridge. If transit movements through there get delayed, then we would look at building the second Basque Bridge. And we're also looking at bicycle and pedestrian levels of service. So how do you measure those? I don't think we're done talking about the phasing of the second Basque Bridge. I think we'll have lots of conversations about that in the future. That's that piece. There's a couple other work groups that we're going to do as part of the 6392. The next work group we're looking at looks at transit planning and finance. So we're working with Sound Transit and King County Metro on that. Our report is due at the end of this year to the governor and the legislature, so that's an ongoing effort. We'll have public outreach on that in December, and we'll take public comment. And we're also working with the Arboretum Botanical Garden Committee, which is the group that oversees the park. It includes representatives from the University of Washington, because they manage the collections. It includes the Seattle Parks Department. It includes a member appointed by the mayor of the City of Seattle and a member appointed by the governor. and local representatives. So we're working on a mitigation plan that's also due to the governor and the legislature at the end of this year. So now I'm going to talk about the floating bridge and landings piece. So this is a project that takes pontoons that we're building over in Grays Harbor, tows them onto Lake Washington, completes the pontoon construction, and hooks up the corridor in Medina and hooks up the corridor to the west. So this includes the 6-lane floating bridge, the bicycle pedestrian path that we talked about. It builds those additional smaller pontoons that we need to float the bridge. The pontoons are those structural features that support the bridge in the lake. So they actually float. So they assemble the bridge on the lake and hook it up. So right now we're in the middle of the procurement process. So we're looking to hire a design build contractor. So the contractor completes the design and then begins the construction. So we have statements of qualifications that we're evaluating from design builders. We'll complete that process this month. And then we issue our request for proposals in November, looking at awarding the contract in spring of next year. And the estimated cost for this is between $700 to $900 million. And I should say the governor is giving us direction, and we're highly motivated to have the bridge open by late 2014. And so that's driving us to deliver these projects in new ways with design build, and that we've never done before. So it's a pretty exciting time for us. So the pontoon construction project, again, this contract's been awarded. Our design builder is in place in completing the design of the project. Our design builder is Kiewit General. We're completing our environmental process, so we'll publish our final EIS, in December, and complete the record of decision, the whole process, in January, so that we can begin construction of what we call a casting facility. So it's when we really talk about it, we call it the highly engineered hole in the ground. So it's a very big hole where we build the pontoons. We have a gate after we build the pontoons, and we float them out in the channel, and we moor them in Grays Harbor. So this contractor will build the major pieces that we're looking to build for the floating bridge, the pontoons. They're building 33 of them. The biggest of them are 360 feet long and 75 feet wide and 24 feet tall. So they're very, very large. So we have actually acquired the property already in Grays Harbor to build this site. It's a 55-acre parcel owned by Weyerhaeuser, or by the end of this month, by the Department of Transportation. We've also acquired the mitigation site out in Grays Harbor for us to do our regulatory mitigation at. And we've been working with the Quinault Indian Nation. They have treaty rights, and so we're working with an agreement with them on how to mitigate their treaty rights that we may affect, so within fishing and gathering. So by next year, we'll be breaking ground in Grays Harbor on the casting facility. They'll complete construction of their pontoons by spring of 2014, and our other contractor on the floating bridge and landings will be taking those pontoons, towing them up the coast, and then onto the Lake Washington.